Hey folks, what's going on? Today I am going to tell you about the story behind the Night Elves. It's kind of a lot of lore to fit into one tiny video, but I did my best. I got the idea for it because after I made my last video titled Story Behind the Blood Elves, someone on Reddit had asked me, if Night Elves were immortal, how do they evolve? And I gave this person a quick answer and said when they dipped into the well of eternity, it sped up their evolution at an absurd rate, more or less magically transformed them, which bred an entirely new race. So I figured I'd just make a quick video about the entire history of the race so I can talk more in depth about the evolution and everything else that had happened. So let's get rolling.
For 10,000 years, the immortal Night Elves cultivated a druidic society within the shadowed recesses of Ashendale Forest. Yet recently, the catastrophic invasion of the Burning Legion shattered the tranquility of their ancient civilization. Led by the arch-druid Malfurion Stormwind and the priestess Miranda History, the mighty Night Elves rose to challenge the demonic onslaught. Though victorious, the Night Elves were forced to sacrifice their cherished immortality and watch their beloved forest burn. Seeking to regain their immortality, a number of wayward druids conspired to plant a special tree that would link their spirits to the eternal world. Despite Malfurion's warnings that nature would never bless such a selfish act, the druids planted the great tree Teldrassil off the stormy coasts of northern Kaldorei. Within the twilight boughs of the colossal tree, the wondrous city of Darnassus took root. However, the great tree was not consecrated with nature's blessing, and soon fell prey to the corruption of the burning legion. Now the wildlands, and even the limbs of the great tree itself, are tainted by a growing darkness. As one of the few Night Elves still left in the world, it is your sworn duty to defend Darnassus and the wild children of nature against the legion's encroaching corruption.
Alright, so about 10,000 years before the first war between the orcs and the humans, Azeroth had only one continent, and it was just Kalimdor. In the center of the continent, there was this lake full of mysterious energies, which would eventually be called the Well of Eternity. A tribe of humanoids eventually would make their way to this enchanted lake. These feral humanoids, who were dark trolls, built settlements along its shores. Eventually the well caused this tribe to change, and it made them wiser, stronger, and immortal. They became known as the Kaldorei, which in their native language means children of the stars. The Kaldorei, who would eventually be known as Night Elves, worshipped the moon goddess known as Elune. The early Night Elf priests and seers studied the well. Their society began to grow, and they began to explore Kalimdor. The only creatures that put them to a halt were ancient dragons. The Night Elves thought that the dragons were the world's guardians, and basically that they and their secrets should be left alone. Eventually the Night Elves went to meet a lot of powerful entities, like Cenarius. He was a demigod of the forest lands. Cenarius began to like the Night Elves, and he started to teach them about the natural world. The Night Elves developed empathy for the forests of Kalimdor after studying druidism with Cenarius. As the years went by, the Night Elf society kept expanding and just growing larger. Ajara, which was the name of the Night Elf's queen, built a palace along the well shore. And her servants, who she called the Kaldorei, or Highborn, doted on her commands, and they believed that they were greater than the rest of the elves. These Highborn were secretly hated by the masses. Ajara was also curious about the Well of Eternity, and ordered the most educated Highborn to search its secrets and hopefully reveal its purpose. The Highborn began to study the well endlessly, and they eventually were able to control the well's cosmic energies. Eventually the Highborn found they could create or destroy things whenever they wanted. They agreed magic was dangerous if used irresponsibly, but Ajara and the Highborn started practicing spellcraft recklessly anyways. Cenarius and many of the Night Elf scholars warned that something very bad would end up happening, but Azshara and her followers kept experimenting anyways. As they grew more powerful, Azshara and the Highborn became more and more cruel towards the Night Elves. She started to fall back away from her subjects, and eventually she just decided not to interact with anyone except for her trusted highborn priests, and she mainly just stayed in her chambers. There was a young scholar named Malfurion Stormrage who spent a lot of time studying the well and its effects. He began to worry that a terrible power was corrupting the highborn and their queen, and he knew something bad was about to happen. The highborn continued to recklessly use the magic, and it sent ripples of energy spiraling out from the Well of Eternity and into the great dark beyond. These ripples went out into the twisting nether and were noticed by alien minds. Sargeras, the great enemy of all life, the ravager of worlds, felt the ripples and was drawn to where they came from. He saw Azeroth and sensed the energies of the Well of Eternity and was consumed by a hunger for it. He wanted to destroy the world and claim the energies for himself. Sargeras got his demonic army together that was known as the Burning Legion, and he came to Azeroth. Sargeras' lieutenants, Archimonde the Defiler and Manaroth the Destructor, prepared their minions to strike. Queen Azshara fell to Sargeras' endless power, and she allowed him entrance into her world. The highborn servants did the same thing and began to worship Sargeras. The highborn aided the queen in opening a portal within the depths of the well to show their allegiance with the Legion. And then Sargeras began his invasion on Azeroth. The Burning Legion stormed into the world through the well and launched attacks on the Night Elf cities. Led by Archimonde and Manaroth, the Legion swarmed all over Kalimdor, leaving only ash behind. The demon warlocks called down searing infernals that crashed into the spires of Kalimdor's temples. The Doomguard, which was a faction within the Burning Legion, marched across Kalimdor's land, and they slaughtered everyone in their path. They also let loose packs of wild demonic fellhounds that completely destroyed the countryside. The Kaldorei did all they could, but they kept getting forced to give up more and more ground to the Legion. The young scholar Malfurion Stormrage had to try to find help for his people. Stormrage, whose own brother Illidan practiced the Highborn's magic, was incensed by the growing corruption amongst the upper class. Trying to convince Illidan to leave behind his dangerous obsession, Furion set out to find Cenarius to create a resistance force. The young priestess, Tyrande, agreed to help these brothers for a loan. Furion and Illidan were both in love with the priestess, but Tyrande loved Malfurion. Illidan resented his brother for that, but his heartache was nothing compared to the pain caused by his magical addiction. Illidan grew very dependent on the magic's energies. He struggled to keep calm under the overwhelming hunger to tap into the well's energies again. He was able to contain himself and help his brother find the demigod Cenarius. And Cenarius, who roamed around Mount Hyjal, agreed to help the Night Elves by searching for the ancient dragons and asking for their help. The dragons, who were led by Alexstrasza, agreed to help fight off these demons. Cenarius rallied an army of ancient treemen and led them against the Legion. As the Night Elves' allies converged on the Well of Eternity, complete warfare was happening. Malfurion and his allies realized that the Legion still could not be defeated by this amount of strength. The huge battle raged on around Azshara's capital city, and the delusional queen waited for Sargeras' arrival. The Lord of the Legion was about to pass through the Well of Eternity and enter their world. His shadow grew bigger as he came closer to the well's surface, and Azshara gathered the most powerful of the Highborn to link their magic together, because that was the only way they could make the gateway open big enough for Sargeras to enter. Malfurion, who was now convinced that the well was the demon's link to Azeroth, insisted that it should be destroyed. His allies, knowing that it was the only source of their immortality and powers, were kind of shocked by this and thought it was rash. But Tyrande agreed with Malfurion's theory and convinced Cenarius and their new dragon allies to storm Azshara's temple and find a way to shut the well down, once and for all. Illidan knew that the destruction of the well would prevent him from wielding magic again, so he abandoned the group and went to warn the Highborn of Malfurion's plan. Because of the madness that his addiction brought on, along with the resentment of Tyrande and his brother's relationship, Illidan didn't even feel bad for it. He felt no remorse for betraying his brother. Illidan made it his one and only goal to protect the well's power by any means necessary. Malfurion was left heartbroken by his brother's departure, and he led his comrades into Azshara's temple. They stormed into the main audience chamber, and they found the Highborn in the middle of their spell. It created an unstable vortex of power within the well's depths. Sargeras' shadow came closer and closer to the surface, and then Malfurion and his allies began to attack. Unfortunately, Azshara had already received Illidan's warning and was prepared for this attack. Almost all of Malfurion's followers fell before the Queen's powers. Tyrande, who was attempting to attack Azshara from behind, was caught off guard by the Highborn guardsmen. Tyrande was able to kill the guardsmen, though she suffered some grievous injuries. After Malfurion saw his love fall, he went into a murderous rage. The battle went on both inside and outside the temple, and Illidan appeared from the shadows near the shores of the well. Illidan filled a bunch of vials with the well's waters because he was convinced that the demons would destroy the Night Elf civilization, and he wanted to be sure to keep enough of the energies for himself. The battle between Malfurion and Azshara put the Highborn's spellwork into chaos. The vortex grew more unstable within the well's depths, and finally exploded, and was the start of a chain of events that would sunder the world forever. The huge explosion completely rocked the temple to its foundations, and sent huge quakes that ripped through the entire world of Azeroth. The battle between the Legion and the Night Elves allies raged around and above the now ruined capital city. The Well of Eternity buckled in upon itself and completely collapsed. The explosion from the well rattled the world, and the seas rushed in and filled the hole left in the planet. About 80% of Kalimdor's landmass was completely torn apart, which left only a few separate continents surrounding the sea. In the middle of the new sea, there was a huge storm of chaotic energies where the Well of Eternity used to be, and this is known as the Maelstrom. The minimal amount of Night Elf survivors grouped together and made some rafts, and they headed to the only land in sight. Malfurion, Tyrande, and Cenarius had survived the Great Sundering. They agreed they would lead the survivors and create a new home. Sargeras and his burning legion were torn out of the world when the well was destroyed, and Malfurion, along with his allies, were left to rebuild. Azshara and the Highborn, for the most part, were smashed underneath the sea. However, there were some survivors among them who made their way to this land. And, of course, Malfurion didn't trust them, but he knew they couldn't cause any serious harm without the power of the Well of Eternity at their disposal. The Night Elves found that the holy mountain Hyjal survived the explosion. Malfurion and the Night Elves climbed to the summit, and they found a small lake between the huge peaks. They discovered that the lake's waters were tainted by magic. Illidan, who had also survived the Sundering, reached this summit a while before Malfurion and the Night Elves did. He poured his vials full of water that he stole from the Well of Eternity into the mountain lake. The well's energies ignited instantly, and it became an entirely new Well of Eternity. Illidan believed that the new well was a gift to the future generations of elves, and was shocked when Malfurion began to hunt him down. Malfurion tried to explain to his brother that magic was inherently chaotic and would only cause corruption, but Illidan refused to give up his magical powers because he was so addicted to it. Malfurion decided that he had no choice but to deal with his brother, who was driven mad by the well's energy once and for all. With the aid of Cenarius, he sealed Illidan in an underground chamber, with the intention to have him remain chained and powerless until the end of time. The Night Elves were concerned that destroying the new well could bring another sundering, so they decided they really had no other choice but to leave it there. Malfurion did say they were never to practice the arts of magic again. Under Cenarius, they started to study the ancient arts of Druidism, so they could one day learn how to heal the now ravaged world and hopefully regrow their forests. For years, the Night Elves worked on rebuilding what was left of their homeland. They left their broken temples and roads to be overgrown and constructed new homes in between the trees and hills at Hyjal's base. And in time, the dragons that had survived the Great Sundering came forth. Alexstrasza the Red, Ysera the Green, and Nazdormu the Bronze landed upon the Druids' land and observed what they had created. Malfurion, who at this time had become an archdruid with immense power, greeted the dragons and told them about the new Well of Eternity. The dragons were alarmed to hear the news, to say the very least, and were worried that because the well remains, the Legion might return to assault the world once again. Malfurion and the three dragons made an agreement to keep the well safe so that the Burning Legion wouldn't find a way back into their world. Alexstrasza placed a single enchanted acorn in the heart of the well. The acorn activated the magical waters, and a giant tree sprang to life. The tree's life-giving energies would extend to heal the rest of the world over time. The Night Elves named their world tree Nordrassel, which in their native language means crown of the heavens. Nosdormu placed an enchantment on the world tree that ensured, as long as this giant tree remained, that the Night Elves would never age or die to any sickness or disease. Ysera placed another enchantment on the world tree and linked it to her own realm, which was a dimension known as the Emerald Dream. The Emerald Dream is a large spirit world that exists outside the regulations of the physical world. From the dream, Ysera was able to regulate the evolutionary path of Azeroth itself. The Night Elf druids, including Malfurion, were now bound to the Emerald Dream through the tree. The druids agreed they would sleep for centuries at a time so their spirits could explore the paths of Ysera's dreamways. After all this, centuries went on, and the Night Elf society expanded yet again throughout the forest that became known as Ashenvale. A lot of the creatures that were plentiful before the Great Sundering started to re-inhabit the land, and the Night Elves were able to enjoy this era of peace. Many of the Highborn grew restless and angry. Like Illidan, they went through the withdrawal that came from the loss of their magic and became just as addicted. They were tempted to tap the energies of the Well of Eternity and practice magic again. Dathramar, who was the leader of the Highborn, began to mock the druids and would call them cowards for refusing to use the magic that he believed was their right to wield. Malfurion and the druids warned the Highborn that if they used magic it was punishable by death. Dathramar and his followers unleashed a horrible magical storm on Ashenvale to convince the druids to abolish their law. The druids didn't want to slaughter so many of their kin since they were all behind it, so instead they decided to exile the Highborn from their lands. Dathramar and his followers boarded a number of ships and they set sail. None of them knew what was beyond the waters of the Maelstrom, but they were still excited to establish a new homeland where they could practice magic freely. The Highborn, or Kaldorei, as Azshara named them before, eventually landed in the land that would later be called Lordaeron, and they planned to build their own kingdom called Kel'Thalas and reject the moon worshipped and nocturnal activity used by the Night Elves. From thereafter, the Highborn were only known as the High Elves. The Night Elves returned all of their attention back to safekeeping their enchanted land. The druids' time of hibernation was nearing, so they prepared to sleep and leave their friends and families behind for centuries. Tyrande, who is now the first priestess of Elune, asked her love Malfurion to not leave for Ysera's Emerald Dream. However, Malfurion was honor-bound to enter the changing dreamways. He said his goodbyes and told her that they would never be apart as long as they held true to their love. Tyrande, now left alone to protect Kalimdor from the dangers of this new world, began to create a fighting force among her Night Elf sisters. These highly trained warrior women, who pledged themselves to defending Kalimdor, became known as the Sentinels. The demigod Cenarius stayed near in Mount Hyjal. His sons, who were known as the Keepers of the Grove, kept a close eye on the Night Elves' land and often aided the Sentinels to keep peace. Even Cenarius' shy daughters, the Dryads, made an appearance from time to time. Tyrande grew lonely without Malfurion by her side, and as the centuries passed while the druids slept, her fear of another demonic invasion grew much more plausible. She felt the Burning Legion was still out there, plotting their revenge. And that is the basic story behind the Night Elves. Of course, the Burning Legion did come back, as we know from the 2 expansions Blizzard made centered around that concept. Thanks for watching, and feedback is always welcome. If you enjoyed learning a little bit about the story behind the Night Elves, please like and subscribe.